What's up, everybody? It's been a busy day, but we've finally made it to closing arguments in Chad Daybell's trial. And today we're going to react to and break down the state's closing argument against Chad Daybell. Did they do enough to wrap it all up, put a bow on it before this jury, and prove this case beyond a reasonable doubt? Let's jump in and take a listen. So no surprise, Lindsay Blake is going to handle this closing argument. She starts out with a slide saying money, sex, and power is what this case is about. They've been telling this story and stringing it together pretty flawlessly throughout the trial with a couple hiccups, maybe procedurally. She starts with the jail cell about how they're searching the backyard. They know it. Everybody knows it. The kids are buried back there. She goes around through the background of them meeting, how their spouses are still alive, but they are adamant about being with each other.
You also heard how shortly after meeting Lori, the defendant began drafting his version of their story, the James and Elena story. And throughout the trial, you heard how Chad and Lori would go by different names sometimes, or they had code names or persons that they claimed to be in prior lives. James and Elena were two of those names, Raphael and Lily, all really Chad and Lori. The James and Elena story was written by Chad, Chad's own words. And what do we know from James and Elena? In James and Elena, and you heard about this from Agent Hart, and you heard about it from Analyst Heidemann. James and Elena, Chad writes, at this time, their spirits could not be restrained any longer, and a long-awaited makeout session took place in that lobby. This was manifest in the mortal world to James and Elena through the scientific phenomenon known as loin fire. He also, another excerpt, he resisted an impulse to kiss her, but his entire body was on fire. He instinctively knew she was everything he had ever dreamed of. Additionally, her dimensions were exactly what he had always fantasized about, but that revelation would have to wait a month. These are written about.
Going to go hard on the sexual motive.
His first meeting with Lori. She is everything he's fantasized about. What is this about for Chad? Sex. He wants to have sex with Lori Vallow. He wants to be in a relationship with her, and he decides that the first time he meets her. We also see in there he has to wait about a month for the full revelation of her dimensions. What does that mean? He has to wait a month before he actually gets to see her body. They're absolutely engaged in an affair. They had two favorite positions that particularly bonded them together. Nothing meant more to James than holding Elena in his arms and unifying their bodies in perfect synchronization.
Nothing meant more to him.
Nothing meant more. This was about sex. The James and Elena story is essentially an autobiography outlining the defendant's sexual affair with Lori Vallow, under the facade of having a spiritual undertone or being spiritually sanctioned. But let's call it what it was. Chad's graphic description of his boundless lust for Lori Vallow.
Call it what it was. They can say it's, scripturalized or sensationalized religion or whatever it may be. It was all about him wanting Lori Vallow, period. That's the motive. I need her. I need her all to myself. How do I get there? That's how he committed and why he committed the crimes.
Who he deemed to have perfect proportions and to be a goddess. Again, Chad is still married as he's writing this story for Lori. And you heard excerpts from the James and Elena story from Agent Hart. James had served in an important position in the Lord's church, and Elena had been his beloved spouse and best friend. That relationship was now meant to continue in this lifetime. Again, married in a prior life, prior probation, it justifies having an affair in this life. He tried to delicately describe their connection to each other, and he was delighted that she believed him. Another theme throughout the trial. Chad is the one with the information. Chad is the one with knowledge, and he shares it with others. Chad shared with Lori their connection to each other, and he was happy she believed him.
Chad's the one with the information. Chad's the manipulator. Chad's who they went to when they had a question.
He knew they were meant to be married again and complete important missions together before the second coming. Again, they're both married to other people. And part of this trial, there was testimony about what we never saw. Through all the communications, through all the discovery, through all the evidence, no indication ever that Chad Daybell intended to divorce Tammy. No indication ever that Chad Daybell intended to separate from Tammy, but he wants to be married to Lori. This mission
If you're not going to divorce, you're not going to separate. How else do you get rid of Tammy and end up with Lori?
Daybell intended to separate from Tammy, but he wants to be married to Lori. This mission included being with him, and they would progress together as translated beings. The full plan wasn't yet completely clear to him. Again, Chad is the one that is a self-proclaimed visionary. He claims he gets revelation. He claims he has visions. The full plan wasn't clear to him. What full plan? How he's going to end up being with Lori Vallow. They are both married. You heard how in early 2019, Chad told Zulema Pastenis he wanted to share some teachings with her. They ended up having a phone call, and Chad started to talk to her about this concept of multi-creations or multiple probations. And when Zulema testified, she had some journal entries. Zulema was open to this concept. She trusted Chad. She trusted Lori, and she was open to their teachings. So much so that she would make journal entries of these because she wanted to keep track of them. She wanted to understand.
And they go through other parts where Alex Cox trusted them 100%. And they connect the three of them so many times in this conspiracy.
That we get a new term introduced of zombie. Chad and Lori taught that if a person was possessed, it meant the body had to die.
Sorry, I'm going to back
The
it
idea
up.
of castings comes into play. And page 5 from Zulema's journal talks about her understanding of castings and what would happen. And you heard Miss Pulowski, Miss Gibb, and Miss Pastenis all talk about how they were involved in castings at different times. There was testimony that sometimes Chad was there, testimony that sometimes he wasn't. But they would do a casting, a prayer circle. There were some other descriptions. But at the end of the day, the person wasn't there. They weren't physically touching the person. How would they know if a casting was successful? Lori would call Chad. Chad had the information. Chad had the knowledge. When it came to Charles, castings on Ned were said to be successful. Ned was gone. But the problem was that eventually, Chad and Lori taught that if a person was possessed, it meant the body had to die. The individual.
And again, we know the defense is going to have a different argument, but there was testimony to this, and it fits in perfectly with the state's theory. Now, there are people that were dark or that there were castings and stuff done that didn't end up dying, but there's a pretty direct line with a lot of them, and others that maybe had attempts on their life, or maybe they were going to be gone later. All the people that ended up being obstacles to what their ultimate goal was for money, sex, and power, all of them ended up dying. The ones that maybe weren't in the way of what they wanted, maybe they could live. But when it was right for them and they needed to, those people died.
That body was gone. An evil entity was in that body, and in order to set the person free, the body had to die. So when a casting was successful and the body didn't die, well, now there's a new entity. That's what Chad would tell them. So Charles became Garrett. Castings are done on Garrett. They called Chad. It was successful. Well, Charles was still alive. Body didn't die. So now Charles is Iplos. And Iplos is an even more demonic entity. Iplos is so dark that we get a new term introduced of zombie. The other thing that was going on around the same time as Charles became Iplos is that Charles actually confronted Lori about her affair with Chad. Around June 29th of 2019, Charles Vallow confronts Lori, and he tells her, I'm going to email Tammy Daybell. She deserves to know what's going on. Charles, in fact, sends an email to Tammy Daybell on June 29th of 2019, informing her of the affair. Charles also sends an email to Chad Daybell on June 29th of 2019, confronting him about the affair, telling him it's improper, it needs to stop. Then on July 1st of 2019, Charles tells Lori, I'm going to go meet with Tammy in person. I'm going to tell her what's going on. Lori tells him, she won't talk to you. She's my friend. Lori and Chad are in constant communication. You heard that throughout the trial. They're having an affair. They're talking. They're getting burner phones. And you heard testimony about the burner phones. They all had multiple different phones that they would use. And when I say they all, Chad and Lori and Alex. Only 10,
AKA the co-conspirators.
10 days later, 10 days after Charles threatens to go and tell Chad's wife about the affair, Charles is shot and killed. He's shot and killed by Alex Cox in Arizona.
Again, timelines just match up way too well for this to be a coincidence. Whether it's Charles Vallow, Tammy Daybell, JJ, or Tylee. The dark and light, the zombies, the death scores, them being obstacles to money, sex, and power all lines up way too much to be a coincidence. Lori even says she's going to try to work it out with Charles for financial reasons. And then when she finds out he switched the life insurance policy, she says, I'm still going to get the money from Social Security transferred into my account. And then they get more into just how horrible all this sounds with the light and dark scales and what Chad did.
Alex 100% believed Chad.
That was a line she repeated throughout closing, one of her themes. this person 100% believed Chad or 100% believed Lori.
You also heard how at some point Chad had deemed Alex to be Lori's protector. He talked to Alex about how Alex had been her protector in multiple lives, multiple creations, multiple probations. Alex was here to protect Lori. And you heard that Alex relished that role. He relished having a purpose. He relished being part of this. One thing, though, Lori was upset about. Zulema had asked Lori at one point, if Charles is a zombie, why are you back with him? Lori's response, I need to get my finances in order. After Charles' death, Lori reaches out to Chad to tell him, I'm not getting the $1 million life insurance policy. He must have switched the beneficiary. As they proceed through this conversation, Chad's response, interesting if it was him after he had 2 bullets in his chest. No remorse, no grief. That it was probably Ned that changed the insurance. Don't worry, I'll still get $4,000 a month in Social Security. Lori knew JJ would get Social Security benefits. 7 days after Charles' death, Chad is texting Lori. I was told extreme changes are coming for me. I welcome them both.
He's told extreme changes are coming from him. He welcomes them both. What extreme changes are coming? You may have guessed it.
What were the extreme changes? Charles has been dead for 7 days. What extreme changes do we know happen in Chad's life? Well, his mistress's 2 kids end up dead on his property, and his wife Tammy ends up dead in their marital bed. Extreme changes are coming, and I welcome them.
That was powerful. The use of that quote and context and using the other facts that are in evidence that other people have testified to hammer that home. I mean, that right there could have been the slogan of the closing to me. Extreme changes are coming for me and I welcome it. And then exactly how that line of deaths line up.
Chad and Lori engage in further text conversation throughout that month of July. Chad, at this point, they've started to talk about labeling people as dark. And again, Chad is the one that can do that. They start talking about death percentages. Chad, again, is the only one that can determine someone's death percentage. How close someone is to dying is determined by Chad.
We know the defense has an argument against that. We're going to hear it when he's doing his closing argument. But there is evidence of this, that Chad's the guy you got to go to. And everybody asks, Lori, can you ask Chad what the death percentage is? We have all sorts of text messages of people asking Chad what somebody's death percentage is, or dark percentage, or zombie, or whatever.
Chad Daybell. He tells Lori in this message, and keep in mind, he is talking about toddler children, young children. He decreased the pain tolerance to 1% and greatly increased his pain. He then asked Lori, do you want me to cause pain to those 2 threes? Who are the 3s? Again, remember, when someone's light or dark, there's also generally a numeric value or a numeric number assigned to that. In this case, 3 threes. So they were 3 dark. He ends up saying, yes, if they are going to act up, we'll at least give them a reason to scream. These are young children. And specifically, these are the children of Melanie Pulowski that are being referenced. Right after saying he's going to give these children a reason to scream, I love, cherish, treasure, and adore you. He wants to be with Lori Vallow. Chad messages her later in July. Every few weeks, I get to escape and have amazing adventures with my goddess lover. But then I have to return to my place under the stairs, feeling trapped. But I sense permanent freedom is coming. What did Chad need permanent freedom from? He just returned from seeing Lori Vallow. His wife is still alive. He feels trapped when he's at home with his family. Who does Chad want freedom from? Tammy. And he senses it's coming. We talked in this trial about how Chad and Lori would manipulate each other. In this text thread, Lori Vallow is upset with Chad.
Admit a little bit that Lori does manipulate Chad, but they drive home the point that, we've talked about a ton in this trial. Chad absolutely manipulates Lori, especially with his, self-proclaimed prophecy and things like that.
And Chad tells her, referring to Grandpa Keith, who's someone that's deceased, that he is supposed to warn her that she's unprotected. The angels are angry that Lori's ignoring him. And if she wants that protection back, she better talk to him. Lori's response, I love you. Chad, thank you, my love. I will get things restored.
Like, if that's not manipulation, I don't know what is. Manipulation of the worst kind. And how does he do it? With religious stuff and with prophecy and him being a visionary. That's how he does it. That's how he did it. That's his MO. And that's consistent throughout the case.
Chad manipulated Lori with power. Chad held himself out to be a visionary. He held himself out to have spiritual gifts, and he would manipulate Lori with that. Lori, on the other hand, she was frustrated. Her husband's gone. Chad's wife is still alive. Chad and Tammy have 5 children. They have a grandchild. Chad's life is undisturbed, and it causes contention between Lori and Chad because Lori wants Chad to be freed up now. So Lori's frustrated. I really do want you to. I just can't be in the way anymore. If things change, then we can talk, but we have nothing until things change. What needs to change? Tammy's in the way. Charles is gone. Lori can't be with Chad because Tammy. Chad's response, I want you. Nothing else matters.
I want you. Nothing else matters. Another theme that's repeated.
Lori manipulates Chad with sex. From the minute he met her, he wanted to be with her, and she knew it.
And again, they're not backing away from Lori being a bad guy here too, and being manipulative here too, because they're in this conspiracy together. Them two with Alex Cox.
About a month after Charles' passing, Lori's asking Chad, do you think there is a perfectly orchestrated plan to take the children? Chad's response, there is a plan being orchestrated for the children. I was showing last night how it fit together. Again, Lori asked Chad. Chad has the answers. Is there a plan to take the children? And what children are they referencing? JJ and Tylee.
Brutal. Just brutal.
I don't know why it had to go down this.
And, this is when they again talk about the project being finished. We watched or we listened to this together already on another video. They switched the money to Lori. And then, we get even more into death percentages and turning up the pain. I'm going to jump to that part here.
Chad's response, she is at 0.13. I've been instructed to focus my efforts on Hillary. In July, 7 days after Charles' death, Chad Daybell texts Lori, I've been instructed to focus my efforts on Hillary. Who is Hillary? That's Tylee. Lori asks him, find out her percentage for me and JJ's. What's the percentage? It's the death percentage. Chad's response, she is at 0.13. I turned up the pain to 10. Tylee is a 16-year-old girl. He's turning the pain up to 10, and he's saying her death percentage is 0.13. He then tells her that
the jury's blood is not boiling right now, right? I mean, so we're listening to the state. When we do a lot, so tomorrow I'm going to be doing a live breaking down the defense's closing argument and the state's rebuttal. So we're going to do a live poll tomorrow on where you guys sit if you were jurors on this case. But as you listen to the state, let me know in the comment section or in the live chat during the state's closing or at the end of the state's closing, would you be at a guilty verdict? Did they prove this case beyond a reasonable doubt? You've heard all the evidence. You've heard all the state arguments. Then we'll see after defense if that changes for anybody, where anybody is, and then again after the state's rebuttal. So this one is just going to be in the comment section. Tomorrow's will be a live poll. But I want to know where people sit right now.
AL, another name for Chad, visited him talking about JJ and told him to follow Amy into the light. We all know what it means if someone says, follow someone into the light. July 23rd, again, Lori to Chad. Check Tylee. Why does she want Tylee checked? She's being super sweet and helpful. Her daughter was being sweet and helpful, and Lori wants to know, is she dark? What's her death percentage? And who is she asking for that information? Chad Daybell. On September 8th of 2019, Tylee, Alex, JJ, and Lori take a trip to West Yellowstone, a seemingly normal family outing. However, we know that was the last time Tylee Ryan is ever seen alive. And what is Chad Daybell doing on September 8th of 2019? He's looking up south-southwest wind. Why does this matter? Remember how Tylee was found. Remember what happened to her. That young lady was burned. Her remains discovered on Chad Daybell's property.
And she goes into excruciating detail about what happened to Tylee. And we're not going to go through it on this or listen to it. She also talks about the timeline for JJ. Of course, he was found on Chad's property. Chad labeled the kids dark. They were buried on his property. That way, Lori and him could be alone. Again, just lining it up perfectly. It all makes too much sense. There's really only one explanation that all the evidence points to. Then they eventually get to Tammy and how nobody noted any physical problems. Everybody said she was fine.
On July 11th of 2019, since he left, Tammy's levels were dropping. Chad then tells Lori, Tammy is at a 3.
I think I jumped.
Had the death percentages. Again, back in July, when Chad and Lori are talking about death percentages, Chad tells Lori he got the inspiration to go back to his to he uses my original death percentages that helped us track Charles, Ned. Chad had the death percentages to track Charles. Tammy is very close. Her percentage has fallen steadily since Iplos left. It is encouraging. Charles Vallow was killed on July 11th of 2019. Since he left, Tammy's levels were dropping. Chad then tells Lori, Tammy is at a 3. Chad tells Lori on July 30th of 2019, this afternoon, Tammy said she felt lightheaded, as if her body and spirit weren't connected. Interestingly enough, Coroner Dye made a similar note in a report that Chad told her something along the lines of Tammy not feeling connected to her body. Chad said that back in July. On October 5th, Chad messages Lori, big news about Tammy. The short version is she has been switched. Tammy is in limbo, and a level 3 demonic entity named Viola is in her body. Tammy's now a zombie, essentially, or she has a dark entity in her. Again, someone's dark, someone's a zombie, the body has to die, and Chad can tell and controls the death percentages. Chad goes on to tell Lori, I have now checked 3 times since I got home and get more affirmative answers each time. Chad then tells her, not fully sure of the timing for removal, but once her actions verify the differences, I don't want to wait.
Pretty damning. Death percentage zombie all coming from Chad. Once it changes, he does not want to wait.
Someone's dark, the body has to die. Chad doesn't want to wait. On October 9th of 2019, you all heard about an attempted shooting of Tammy Daybell.
She does a great job. We'll listen to a little bit more of this section.
Earlier in the day, a device associated with Alex Cox traveled down to Sportsman's Warehouse, and you heard how Alex purchased several items. They were all dark in color, a face mask, a knit beanie, frog tog pants, and mittens. And you heard the gloves were a flip mitt. You could pull them back to do things that you needed your fingers for, such as shooting a gun. You heard how later on the 9th, after going to Sportsman's, that device drove up by the Daybell residence, didn't stop, but was in the vicinity, and then left back to Rexburg. What you also heard was that Alex Cox had purchased a burner phone on October 8th of 2019, just the day before. That device was activated on October 9th of 2019. Chad Daybell also had a new burner phone that he'd activated on October 8th of 2019. And you heard talk of the 401 number. That particular phone was only in contact with Lori Vallow and Alex Cox. You heard how around October 9th and in the days after, there were multiple searches conducted on the Homer J. Maximus account. Homer J. Maximus was Alex's.
So they do a great job here of connecting Alex Cox to this, and the whole defense argument of a paintball gun wouldn't be the first time a victim didn't see the gun right or thought it was something or might have been a paintball gun. Doesn't prove anything. Common sense to me in the totality of the circumstances, where Cox was, what he bought, what he was doing, what he was searching on Google, all lines up that was an attempt on Tammy's life, even down to law enforcement looking at the gun, seeing the pin or something was messed up that would cause a misfire, which is what happened that day, most likely. But again, they don't have to prove that attempt on Tammy's life beyond a reasonable doubt. It just is something in the line of motive and action to what gives us, when Tammy actually passed, why the state believes and proved with more medical testimony and inconsistencies in the defense why Tammy likely died at the hand of Chad Daybell. Will that be enough to prove it beyond a reasonable doubt? Because possibilities and even maybe really likely or most likely is sometimes not enough. They talk about the timelines of the castings with what happened with Tammy, confirmed. They went through, the stuff they wanted to bring up on rebuttal about how the cop couldn't have been in the house when Tammy was searching because he didn't report until after she already did the Google searches, things like that. Those I would have left out of closing. I didn't think they were a big deal in a multi-week trial. They decided to talk about them. She did hit all the high points. I did think it was a bit long, if I'm being honest. You guys let me know if you thought it was too long, too short, or just right. To me, it felt like it was a little too long. I would have kept some stuff out like that because the punchlines and the money, sex, and power stuff to me was so powerful. The timeline and the coincidences were just too much. I thought that was great. They show the body cam footage where, she lies about JJ and Tylee clearly. They talk about the insurance going up and how Chad knew and collected that insurance right away. And all the actions after Tammy's death obviously show Chad wasn't remorseful or very sad about it, but instead it worked perfectly according to his self-proclaimed prophetic vision and plan. Then she got into the medical examiner, which I thought was obviously a big piece of evidence in their case.
Parent. Second time, Chad said she'd been coughing violently. Both went to bed at 10. He woke up at midnight and her body fell out of bed. Coughing, found her at 6.
Hold
The
on.
only reported health concerns. And they talked about how they went through that process to reach their final conclusion.
Okay, sorry. I got to back it up a little bit so we can get
When he
what
got
the
off the
medical
phone,
examiner
she
said.
questioned him. Alex ended up telling her, said, I'm either a... Lori had responded December 12th of 2019, or excuse me, on December 12th of 2019, Alex Cox ended up dying the day after Tammy's body was exhumed. An autopsy was conducted on Tammy's body, and you heard from both Dr. Eric Christensen and Dr. Lily Marsden. They both unequivocally testified the manner of death was a homicide, the cause asphyxiation. And you heard them talk about the different manners of death. And you heard Dr. Christensen just yesterday talk about no sign the asphyxiation was a suicide, no sign the asphyxiation was natural, no sign the asphyxiation was accidental. That left homicide, death by the hands of another. They talked about the bruises on Tammy. They talked about the fact those could be consistent with being restrained. They talked about the exhaustive toxicology tests that were done to try to ensure they had the correct cause of death. They talked about considering all the other natural possibilities, seizures, cardiac arrhythmia. And they talked about how they went through that process to reach their final conclusion. They talked about they followed their normal protocol. They gathered evidence, they gathered information, and you heard Dr. Christensen talk about that. Normally, you give a medical history. With his patients, they can't. They have to rely on collateral sources and collateral information. They gather the medical records and they gather reports and statements surrounding that person's death, so they ensure they reach the correct conclusion. Again, both of them were consistent in their findings, homicide by asphyxiation. You further
So that's why they got both of them up there to say that, consistent in their findings. She even brought them back again to confirm and knock down all the defense's arguments. Very effective way of using those medical examiners.
heard from multiple of Tammy's coworkers and friends that she didn't have any known health issues. Tammy was very active by all accounts. She participated in fitness classes. She participated in clogging. She never missed work. She was reliable and a hard worker. The only reported health concerns to law enforcement came from Chad Daybell. You heard several officers talk about that. Agents, investigators. Chad's kids didn't want to talk to law enforcement. They didn't want to provide information. The information came from Chad. Chad told people different things regarding Tammy's death. Heather Daybell, Jason William, the coroner. Tammy was sick, coughing, found her at 6 a.m. dead. Also to Heather Daybell, no autopsy because the coroner had found matter in her throat. There was no testimony of that. She died of an embolism, also told.
Important, these inconsistencies and trying to explain it away and trying to make it seem like something, whether it was that or not. Why would you do that? If you're trying to cover something up. That's the state's theory.
To Heather Daybell. Chad said Tammy woke up at midnight, throwing up, and died at 2 a.m. Consistent that it's an embolism, different time of death to Alice Gilbert. Tammy was sick, coughing, went to bed around 10. Chad went at 1 and found her cold and dead on the floor. To Hannah Munoz. Again, remember Hannah went through the funeral line or the viewing line twice, once with each parent. Second time, Chad said she'd been coughing violently. Both went to bed at 10. He woke up at midnight and her body fell out of bed. While Tammy's autopsy was being conducted, while the kids were still missing, while Alex passed away, Chad and Lori remained in Hawaii, on the island of Kauai, living out the plan as set forth by Chad Daybell. They had money.
I mean, that's a wild part of the story as well.
Power, sex, and no obstacles, and specifically no earthly relatives, no encumbrances.
I mean, literally, they set it up exactly how they wanted to. And where were they? They weren't mourning all these deaths or losses in their lives. They were in Hawaii getting married and celebrating. And that video of them in Hawaii is, it's crazy.
However, they left a wake of destruction and tears for those that had trusted them. Chad and Lori consistently told those around them it was all a misunderstanding. To Jason Williams, it's a simple situation. The kids were safe and it would all be cleared up in time. However, neither Chad or Lori ever came forward to provide any information on the whereabouts of the kids. On June 9th and 10th of 2020, you heard multiple officers, investigators, detectives talk to you about the search of Chad Daybell's property. Agent Daniels described in detail how the search was conducted, and you heard multiple officers talk about the scene, the smell, the process, and the callousness of the way the children were discarded. You heard how the officers present at Tylee's scene were on their hands and knees, sifting through the dirt.
I'm going to skip through some of these details.
For confirmation of the plan. And We'd heard multiple testimony, multiple talk of Lori asking Chad about a plan, of Lori asking Chad for confirmation of the plan. And one of those things that we heard was a call that took place on June 8th of 2020. I think in the slide it was dated as 2019. That call took place on June 8th of 2020, the day before Tylee and JJ were found. Lori wanted confirmation of the plan. The judge is going to give you jury instructions, and we talked clear back in jury selection about those jury instructions. But I just want to remind you, when we're talking about a conspiracy is an agreement between two or more persons to commit a crime. Only one of those persons has to commit one overt act. So one act in furtherance of the conspiracy. And you're going to be given jury instructions, and they'll have the overt acts listed out.
And so this is how she's connecting it all. And she's going to explain how Chad Daybell does not have to physically commit the individual crime in order for them to convict him of conspiracy. And she's going to say exactly what they do need to prove as far as involvement goes with Chad Daybell.
And looking at the overt acts, endorse and espouse religious belief for the purpose of encouraging and or justifying murder.
So they're going, these are the overt acts that they're adding that Chad did. So when you think in your head, it's like using religious beliefs to, push and ratify the murder. It's like, check. So you can think through and go through in your head whether or not they're checking all these boxes for the overt acts.
Heard testimony from multiple witnesses, Lieutenant Hermosillo, Melanie Gibb, Zulema Pastenis, Ian Pulowski, David Warwick, Alice and Todd Gilbert. There were Temple records, iCloud records, Verizon records. You heard from Detective Considus and forensic accountant Mike Douglas, as well as Mark Sari with the Social Security Administration, that Lori changed Tylee's money to go to her on August 16th of 2019. You heard that Lori, Tylee, JJ, and Alex moved from Chandler to Rexburg. You heard about that through multiple investigators, multiple witnesses. You heard how Chad Daybell Googled South-Southwest wind and visited a website. Detective Stubbs talked about that. Analyst Heidemann talked about that. You heard from Agent Balance and Agent Wright, as well as Patrick Eller, how Alex went to apartment 175 in those early morning hours of September 9th. You heard, again, from Detective Considus, forensic accountant Douglas, Mark Sari, and Agent Hart, that Lori did not report to the Social Security Administration. She continued to collect that money. There's evidence of that in the iCloud accounts and bank records. Similarly, same type of evidence to support, she continued to wrongfully collect those Social Security benefits. On or about September 23rd, Alex took possession of JJ. Lori tells Warwick and Gibb, JJ's with Alex, refuses to let David Warwick see him on the 23rd, and the night before David and Melanie had seen him with Alex.
So I haven't watched the defense's closing yet or the rebuttal, so I don't know if she does this later, but she doesn't laboriously go through every element and every fact in the indictment and slowly go through. She's telling the big picture story of how they have to convict him of these crimes and the overt acts and how they're connecting it all together, not boring them, doing it in a way where it's impactful and grabs them, probably makes their blood boil. Will it be enough? Is it a good strategy versus how some lawyers do it? They read a lot of definitions. They read specifically what they have to prove. They say specifically how they proved it. It's a different kind of strategy. I kind of like the way she does it. I've seen it done both ways. I've done it both ways. It's been effective both ways. But it just kind of feels like strategy and what your feeling is on how the jury feels about the defendant in the case.
We heard multiple clips from that November 26th interview with Lori Vallow, where she provided false information. JJ wasn't with Gibb. She was married to Chad. She didn't provide truthful information. September 23rd to February 1st, again, similar to Tylee in the Social Security, Lori failed to report that. You heard about that through those financial timelines that were presented and that testimony. September 9th, similarly, she continued to wrongfully collect that money. She didn't report it. She continued to collect it. Again, that Chad and Lori espoused religious beliefs in an attempt to justify their actions. You heard multiple witnesses talk about that.
Definitely.
On September 1st, again, we've already talked about that. Multiple witnesses, multiple evidence showing they moved to Idaho. And again, remember, those text messages designating Tylee, JJ, and Tammy as dark happened before that move. Text messages with Chad and Lori regarding death percentages, we just discussed those today. You heard about them through Agent Hart, through those iCloud records. Chad Daybell obtained a burner phone. We heard about him obtaining multiple phones, multiple phone numbers. We talked about Alex Cox obtaining a burner phone on October 9th. Text messages between Chad, Lori, and Lori about Tammy being possessed. Again, we talked about those today. They came in through Investigator Edwards and Agent Hart. September 8th, Chad signed that application to increase Tammy's life insurance. His signature's on that policy. Emma Daybell talked to you about that. Alex Cox attempted to shoot Tammy on October 9th. Talked about that. You heard from multiple witnesses about the firearm, about what was.
These are a lot of overt acts that we've spent weeks going over testimony proving fact by fact. And to list them like this and run through them pretty quickly like she did, I think is effective.
Reported. Deputy Cannon, Detective Kaikamanu, Investigator Edwards, Agent Wright, Agent Balance. Alex Cox conducted multiple internet searches. So we talked about that, the Homer J. Maximus account, the searches about how to shoot the AR in the cold, and different things regarding a Grendel 6.5, as well as shooting through a Dodge Dakota. Alex being at the gun ranges. We talked about that again today. Detective Kaikamanu, Investigator Edwards, Agent Wright. I'll talk to you about that. Alex traveling to Sportsman's Warehouse on October 9th. Agent Balance, Agent Wright, Investigator Edwards, Detective Kaikamanu. I'll talk to you about that location data and the recovery of the items purchased, or the identification of the items purchased, I should say. Alex being at the church parking lot approximately 2.5 miles from the Daybell residence on October 18th, 2019. You heard about that information from Agent Balance, Agent Wright, Detective Kaikamanu, and Investigator Edwards. One other instruction that's going to be talked about and the court already has is principle to commit first-degree murder. When we're talking about principle, it can include aiding and abetting, so advising or assisting, encouraging, commanding, coercing another. Chad didn't ever have to actually physically cause the death of another person if you believe the state has met our burden with one of those other elements.
So did they I don't think they proved that it was actually his hands that did this. Maybe it could have been, but did he encourage? Did he entice them to? Did he manipulate them to do this? Did he aid in them doing this at all?
If Chad advised or assisted, encouraged, commanded, coerced, if it was premeditated, so planned or intended. Tammy Daybell was a 49-year-old mother of 5, a new grandmother.
So before we do this, this is kind of her punchline at the end. So this is the end of closing. I mean, yeah, of her first close. We call this first close and rebuttal, second close. When I was at the state, that's what we called them, because you get to go to the beginning and the end because you have the burden. And my guess is she's taking a lot more time than prior. I don't think it's going to take 2.5 hours, which is, I'm assuming, the combined time, because I think this was almost 2 hours. So this is kind of the punchline. It hits you hard. It hits you right here. I thought it was a great ending, and the jury, what do you think after you hear this? Let me know in the comments.
Tammy Daybell was a 49-year-old mother of 5, a new grandmother. Chad labeled her as dark or possessed. Her death percentage was low. We know what happens to the body. Tammy had to die. Tylee Ryan, a 16-year-old young lady with her life ahead of her. Labeled as dark or possessed by Chad Daybell, death percentage low. We know what has to happen. Tylee has to die. JJ Vallow, a 7-year-old little boy with most of his childhood and his whole life ahead of him. Labeled as dark or possessed by Chad Daybell, death percentage low. JJ has to die. All 3 victims gone too soon.
And that's it.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Blake. That will.
I mean, that's brutal. I maybe the only thing I would have added is I would have thrown in there, and why? Money, sex, and power. They were the encumbrances. They were the obstacles. They got rid of them, ended up in Hawaii when we found them, basically, something like that. But I mean, I thought, whew, that was a good closing. And there's so much to pack in, so it's easy for somebody to say it's too long, like I did. I'm not really crushing her for it, because it's hard to cut stuff out when you're a lawyer, right? I always talk about trying to say as much as I can in as few words as I can, or as quickly as I can, to keep somebody's attention, bring them in, keep them with me. And that can be really hard in a case when you put this much time and energy into. So I get why you want to pack as much as you can in there, especially if the judge gives you the time. So let me know where you're at. Let me know where you'd be voting right now. And then we're going to be live together tomorrow. Make sure you subscribe and hit that reminder bell so you don't miss tomorrow's live, where we can really dig into this, talk about how long we think the jury's going to be out, when we think a verdict's going to be coming. We'll talk about all that tomorrow on the live. Hit the reminder bell so it'll remind you when that happens. And like this video if you wouldn't mind. I appreciate you guys so much. That's all we got. Till next time, I'm out of here. Thanks for watching another episode of The Lawyer You Know. If you enjoyed the episode, please hit the thumbs up and share with your friends who may be interested here on YouTube. And don't forget to subscribe. You can also follow us on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and TikTok. And don't forget to check out the Lawyer You Know podcast, with new seasons dropping every quarter. If you have a case you want to talk to us about, if it's a personal injury case, wrongful death, catastrophic injury, car accident, or slip and fall case, please email us at lawyeryouknow@gmail.com. And of course, all these links I just mentioned are included in the description below on this episode and every episode. So until next time, this is Peter Tragos, The Lawyer You Know.